Everybody makes mistakes. And if you're doing media and reporting, you basically have one job, and that one job is not necessarily to get it wrong. But like everyone else, we're human beings. And the stories, the further you're away from the story, the more difficult it is to even know if the story is correct, let alone report it to somebody else accurately. One of the things, though, of the worst things that you can do is to misreport what someone says or to misattribute something that the person is saying. Bob said blah, 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 blah. And then you find out Bob didn't say that. And yet you put it in quotes as if you knew as a flat fact that that conversation took place or those words came out of that individual's mouth. That is a big deal because those things can be crafted to get across connotations that aren't there. And sometimes the specific words matter because the specific words can give nuance that might not have been there in the previous aforementioned fake pronunciations that they were attributed to that person. The Washington Post did this. The paper of record, the Washington Post, took words and put them in Trump's mouth that Trump never said. Yes, Trump was trying to get people to overturn the election. Yes, it was a failed putsch attempt. Yes, he called Raffensperger and they had to basically recorded the conversation and leaked it immediately where you could basically see Donald Trump trying to push him to find votes that weren't there. But the conversation that they were talking about, Washington Post, was between Trump and an official in Raffensperger's office. And the words that they were attributing to Trump, apparently Trump never said. Because later, when the information was released and you could read it or hear it for yourself, Trump never said those words. The media critic writes a correction excoriating the paper about the mistakes and explaining in long form how they came to make a mistake so bad as to put words in Trump's mouth that Trump never said. Again, you can say whatever you want to say about Trump. And you can say he's an ogre. You can say he's a horrible person. You can say he tried to knock over the government. All of those things. Fair enough. Those things might even be true. But that's secondary from the paper's job to get it right. And to not attribute and put words in people's mouth who didn't say those words. It goes to this media trend with Trump where they kept making mistakes and it was always in the direction against Trump. You would think that just on rare chance it would go in the other direction, but not so much. This is just a long one in a long string of those type of errors and those type of mistakes. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you are subscribed. Apparently, notifications are not being sent out. And people are being unsubscribed. I've seen it happen before where a large number of people, and it was basically Google's system knocking people off the rolls. So definitely make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the button and the notifications. I do shows all the time. I was doing a show 3 in the morning, I think, yesterday. Yeah, just make sure you subscribe. So the Washington Post reported that Donald Trump had told an official working in Georgia's Secretary of State's Brad Raffensperger's office to, quote, find the fraud, unquote, in the state. Now, the recording eventually gets released. And the recording doesn't have Trump using those words. Instead, Trump says she would be praised when the, quote, right answer comes out, unquote, and encouraged her to closely examine mail-in ballots in Fulton County, the heavily blue state, and the most populated county in the region. This I'm reading from Fox News. Now, those are different. Um, and you could say that find the fraud is effectively, I don't know, I guess examine the ballots, but that's kind of different. Find the fraud is almost like a wink and a nod that I know there's fraud there, but look, I need you to go find it. Wink, wink. When everybody knows at that point that what he wants is her to find him additional votes or get rid of some of Joe Biden's. But to say closely examine is legally fine. I need you to examine those ballots. Now, you could say with a wink and a nod that Trump is saying, look, I need you to find me those votes. You could say that. But the problem is, find the fraud is different. Technically, it is different than examine the ballots. Now, you could use, excuse me, you could say you praise when the right answer comes out. But again, the catch here is find the fraud comes across to me as I want you to go and do something illegal, as opposed to I want you to go and examine the ballots. And look, this is coming from somebody who said Donald Trump should have been impeached and kicked out of office. There is a subtle distinction there that can be made, even though I do believe that he wanted her to basically try to find him some votes. Otherwise, why would he even be having a conversation with her? The entire point that he's contacting the office is because he believes that there are votes there that are cheated, or he wants them to do something grotesquely illegal. Either way you cut it, he wanted them to get him some more votes. He wanted him to basically get Georgia for Donald Trump, and the office wouldn't do it. But look at the votes and examine them closely. It's different than go find me some fraud. And you could say those things are basically the same, but there's a technical difference in them. I don't know. I don't know. Either way, it's somewhat of a moot point. The Washington Post should not be attributing words to people if they didn't say those words. It's that basic. It's that simple. It doesn't really matter if it has the same connotation. You fucked up. That's wrong. And that brings up questions about other things that you've done in your other papers where you might have misattributed using the same type of dodgy reporting. What they basically did, and as they explain it, right here, Fox News. The Post published a lengthy correction to the story. 2 months after the publication of the story, the Georgia Secretary of State released an audio recording of President Donald Trump's December phone call with the state top executive election investigator. The recording revealed that the Post misquoted Trump's comments on the call based on information provided by a source. Trump did not tell the investigator to, quote, find the fraud, unquote, or say that she would be a, quote, national hero, unquote, if she did so. Instead, Trump urged the investigator to scrutinize ballots in Fulton County, asserting she would find dishonesty there. He also told her that she had the most important job in the country right now. A story about the recording can be found here, the headline for the text of the story, right? The Post media expert did a deep dive. Individual familiar with the call who spoke on the condition of anonymity in the Post report was based on an account from Jordan Fuchs, the Deputy Secretary of State, whom Watson briefed on Trump's comments. Basically, they had a source, and the source said, Trump said this, and they had no way to corroborate that particular source. How could they corroborate the source? If they did corroborate the source, they might have got it right. Or they might have said, I don't think he said that. Or they might have had a little bit more doubt as opposed to putting quotes. Yes, I'm drilling into this because the whole fake news stuff. And look, whatever I might think of what Donald Trump was trying to do in the context of Georgia and even here, that is separate and distinct from the job of the Washington Post, which is to get it right. And in this case, they got it wrong. They got it wrong. Right here. I think it's pretty absurd for anybody to suggest that the president wasn't urging the investigator to, quote, find the fraud, Fuchs added. You can think whatever you want. The point is that he didn't say it. Think whatever you want. He didn't say it. You got it wrong. The Post reported it and got it wrong. The recording of it was correct. And maybe what the Post should have did was tried to push to get the recording. That way they could have got it right as opposed to the Washington Post getting it wrong. Wrong. Right here. This is the Post talking about how the Washington Post fucked up. The Post published correction on Trump call with Georgia investigator. It's a big deal. It's their job. It's their one big job to get it right. And I don't want people attributing anything to anybody that they didn't say. Because again, nuance and all sorts of things. Like the very act of being in presence as opposed to being in text changes almost the context, content, the environment, all sorts of things in regards to what is being said. Putting something in flat print in and of itself gets across something that is being said, but how is it being said? Is there nuance to it? Well, what happens when you don't even get that right? What happens when you don't even get that right? There's all sorts of things you could have hit Trump on. And like I said, you could have pushed to get the recording in order to validate what was being said. And it brings up serious questions about other reporting. Do you use one source in order to get quotes from others? And if you use one source, how do you validate that one source? And if that source is in the shadows, how does anybody else evaluate that source? I mean, I got to be honest, this brings in certain questions. If this is the way you typically do your reporting, how do we know that the quotes are accurate? Is that not a fair question? How do we know? If you got this wrong using this particular method, I get the feeling that this method wasn't the first time you used this method. This is kind of like Derek Chauvin. He stood on that man's neck for 9 minutes, casually. He could have been doing a crossword puzzle for all of the stress and strain that he was using or care in the world that he was emitting as he was there. I'm making the point that the fact that he was so cavalier in doing it gets across that this was typical behavior. I would wager to you that that is typical behavior, which means what else have you gotten wrong? What else have you attributed to somebody that they didn't say? And if you have these media sources, let's say the political sources, because you know they're political people who work with the people who are at the Post and all of these newsstands, and they would say, hey, here's the story. And how many of those people say, this person said this? And you put it in your paper. And the person comes out and says, I never said that. But they don't retract it. It's your word against the papers and whoever the paper's anonymous source is, and they just let it ride. And now that you see something like this, does it give more clarity and more reality, or at the very least makes it a little bit more dubious when you're reading those things? You can't take that stuff at face value. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. That is fantastically embarrassing. Let that shit burn and let that shit sink in. Thanks all.